Welcome to Science 9, second quarter, week 6, Organic Compounds. Our learning objective for this day is to recognize the general classes and uses of organic compounds. I have here two groups of compounds. We have the rock, which has most of the rocks, mostly the granite, are composed of silicon and oxygen. So we have here silicon dioxide. Another compound is carbon dioxide with chemical formula of CO2. We also have another compound which is salt. Its chemical formula is NaCl. Another compound is water, which has a chemical formula of H2. Another given compound here in our table is sugar. Sugar is a compound that has a chemical formula of C6H12O6. Another compound is vinegar. We have its chemical formula is CH3COOH. Another compound that we all know that is very important nowadays is ascorbic acid, or the vitamin C, source of vitamin C. Its chemical formula is C6H8O6. And another thing that composes of compounds, which is a PET. Okay, so a PET, that's a acronym that composes of plastic. So its chemical formula is C10H8O4. Now, why do I divide those compounds into two groups? If you are going to notice, if you're going to observe, these groups here are mostly composed of carbon. And these compounds that are composed of carbon are considered to be organic compounds. And therefore, these compounds here, such as sugar, vinegar, ascorbic acid, and plastics, are considered to be organic compound because they are composed of carbon. On the other hand, these groups of compounds here are mostly does not compose of carbon. But why is that carbon dioxide is not considered to be organic compound? Because it doesn't have another element. Aside from carbon, it should have hydrogen. So carbon dioxide, because it doesn't have hydrogen, carbon dioxide, although it is composed of carbon dioxide is not considered to be an organic compound. Okay, so sugar, vinegar, ascorbic acid, and plastics are considered to be organic compounds. And rocks, carbon dioxide, NaCl or salt, and water are considered to be inorganic compounds. So, not all of compounds which compose of carbon are considered to be organic compound. It should have, aside from carbon, it should have hydrogen as well to say that compound is considered to be organic compound. So our main focus for this day is all about organic compounds. So what is organic compounds? Okay? Organic compounds describes chemical compounds that contain carbon and other elements such as hydrogen, oxygen, nitrogen, sulfur, or phosphorus. Even though the organic compounds have been known to man since prehistoric times, their study practically began from the 18th century. The term organic compound was coined by Johannes Jacob Berzelius in 1807. So these are the things that surrounds us that we used also that mostly composed of organic compounds. As I've mentioned, organic compounds are composed of carbon. Because carbon atoms can form single, double, or triple bonds with other carbon atoms. The ability of the carbon to bond with other elements to make up single, double, and triple bonds, that makes the ability of carbon to attach with other elements. And that's why carbon can form different, more complex elements. For that reason, most of the compounds or most of the organic compounds are composed of carbon. So, carbon has 4 valence electrons. These valence electrons can pair with other electrons of those elements. That's why carbon can form at most of 4 bonds. Okay, so it can bond with other elements at its highest amount of bonds, which is 4. Carbon can form up to 4 bonds, which most of the elements cannot do that. Okay, this allows carbons to form long chains, almost unlimited in length. So the ability of the carbon to bond with other elements makes carbon to form long chains of compounds. For that reason, there's what we call organic compound. And those organic compounds are mostly composed of what we call carbon. Organic compounds, since it has composed of mainly carbon, and aside from carbon, those carbon can attract other kinds of elements. That's why organic compounds is divided into different type of groups, or into different groups. There is what we call functional groups. So these are the groups of organic compounds. So again, functional groups are the term used to describe the groups of organic compounds. Functional groups are specific groups of molecules or compounds that are responsible for the varying molecular properties and interactions. These molecules have unique characteristics and personalities regardless of the individual atoms that compose them. So these groups, its main composition, carbon. But since carbon can attract other elements, so aside from carbon, there are different elements that would attach on the carbon. For that reason, it makes different kinds of compounds. And these different kinds of compounds are divided or are grouped into what we call functional groups. The first functional group of organic compound, which is mainly composed of carbon and hydrogen, is what we call hydrocarbons. Again, this hydrocarbon, its main component is carbon and hydrogen only. So these compounds are what we call hydrocarbons. So there are 3 main subgroups of hydrocarbons. They are alkane, alkene, and alkyne. If you're going to notice, alkane are those hydrocarbons that has single bond only between carbons. On the other hand, alkene are those hydrocarbons which has double bond with carbon atoms. And on the other hand, alkynes are kinds or type of hydrocarbon which has triple bond between those carbon atoms. So these are what we call hydrocarbons, the first functional group of organic compound. Aside from hydrocarbons, we also have benzene ring or phenyl. We also have amine. So it has, aside from carbon, it has nitrogen. We also have alcohol. Aside from carbon, it has oxygen and also hydrogen. We also have ether. Okay, aside from carbon, okay, it has oxygen at the middle. We also have alkyl halide. So aside from carbon, so a carbon can attract fluorine, bromine, chlorine, and iodine to make up a certain compound, which is alkyl halide. We have thiol. So aside from carbon, it has sulfur and hydrogen. We also have another functional group of organic compound. So it must have carbon, double bond with oxygen and hydrogen. So that is aldehyde. We also have ketone, double bond with O, okay, and mainly it has carbon. We have ester, carboxylic acid, and amide or amide. So these are the groups, or these are the functional groups of organic compounds, mainly composed of what we call carbon. So another picture of those functional groups. These are their examples. So alcohol is a functional group that composed of carbon. Alcohol, for example of alcohol is ethanol. Its chemical formula is CH3CH2OH, so it has carbon. Okay, and aside from carbon, it has hydrogen and oxygen. We also have another functional group, which is ether. Okay, example ng ether ay yung diethyl ether. This is its chemical formula. So as you can see, it has carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. We also have the aldehydes. Example ng aldehydes are ethanol, or is ethanol. So this is its chemical structure or chemical formula. We also have ketones. Example ng ketones are propanol. The example of ketone is propanol. This is its chemical structure, chemical formula. We also have carboxylic acids. Example ng carboxylic acid is ethanoic acid. Okay, so ethanoic acid is also what we call the acetic acid or the vinegar. Okay, so this is its chemical formula. The ester is another functional group. Example is methyl ethanoate. So its chemical formula is this one. So these organic compounds, these different groups can link together to form a larger and more complex compounds, or what we call more complex molecules that makes up a living organisms. So those organic compounds or different functional groups can combine together, can join together to form main classes of organic compounds. So these four main classes of organic compounds, these classes of organic compounds are more complex, okay, which makes up of a living organism. So most of the living organisms are composed of these four main classes of organic compounds. So again, these classes of organic compounds are composed of different functional groups that join together to form these classes of organic compounds. So what are these four main classes of organic compounds? We have lipids or fats, we have nucleic acids, we have carbohydrates, and proteins. So these are the four main classes or main groups of organic compounds. Let us first tackle about carbohydrates. Carbohydrates are composed of carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen with a ratio of 1:2:1. They differ in the number of carbon atoms present. Their main function is storage due to the large amount of carbon-hydrogen bonds, which can store large amount of energy. So carbohydrates, its main composition are carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, and its main function is for the storage of energy. We all know that the foods or most of the foods that we must eat composed of carbohydrates because it stores large amounts of energy. For that reason, it is very important during the breakfast you have to eat foods with lots of carbohydrates because it stores large amount of energy. Therefore, these amounts of energy stored in that food that contains rich of carbohydrates or that contains lots of carbohydrates will be your source of energy. Okay? Carbohydrates are divided into two groups or two main groups. We have simple carbohydrates or sugars, and we have complex carbohydrates or complex sugars. Simple carbohydrates or simple sugars are subdivided into two groups. We have monosaccharides and disaccharides. From the word mono, these monosaccharides are composed of one unit of sugar or one subunit of sugar. Okay? Example of monosaccharides are glucose, fructose, and galactose. On the other hand, the disaccharides are composed of two subunits of sugars. So, these disaccharides formed from the combination of the two monosaccharides. Example, the sucrose. Sucrose comes from the combination of one molecule of glucose and another molecule of fructose. So once glucose combined with fructose, they will produce one sucrose. Okay, so this sucrose comes from glucose and fructose. Maltose, on the other hand, is a disaccharides again. So it comes from two monosaccharides. What are those two monosaccharides? These are two glucose. So one glucose combined with another glucose will form or will produce maltose. On the other hand, lactose is another disaccharide that comes from the combination of one glucose and one galactose to form lactose. Let's move to complex carbohydrates or what we call polysaccharides. They are composed of larger number of disaccharides. Okay. Polysaccharides examples are starch. Okay, mostly that contains on the foods that we eat. Okay, glycogen and fiber. So this is a picture of this is a glucose, another glucose. Okay, this is their structure. But once glucose and another glucose combine with each other, they will form a disaccharide. They will combine through a glycosidic linkage. Okay, once they combine, they will produce one unit or one molecule of a disaccharide, and this is what we call maltose. So these are the examples of polysaccharides. We have starch, okay, glycogen, we have cellulose and chitin. Starch, glycogen, its simple composition is glucose. Okay, so its main function of the starch, and glycogen, its main function is energy storage. So most of the food that we eat are composed of starch. Okay, energy storage. Cellulose, its simple composition is glucose. Okay, so cellulose, its main function is for structural support. Mostly cellulose are found, or cellulose is found in the plants. Okay, we also have the chitin. Its simple composition is modified glucose. So this chitin, its main function is structural supports, mainly in animals, most especially in insects. So these are the carbohydrates that we can find in your home. Complex carbohydrates, okay, such as starch, glycogen, provides vitamins, minerals, and fiber. So foods such as breads, legumes, rice, pasta, and starchy vegetables contains complex carbohydrates. So it is very important, or it is more important for us to eat those food that are composed of complex high carbohydrates, because they can provide, aside from energy, they can provide vitamins, minerals, and fibers. So these are the foods that compose of complex carbohydrates that we can see at home. So these are the examples of food that compose of complex carbohydrates. Okay, the pictures below are composed of simple carbohydrates. If you can you'll notice. Okay, so it has the donut, the candies, the coke, no, chocolates. So it is not advisable to eat those compounds that are considered to be simple carbs, because they do not provide, aside from energy, because they are carbohydrates, they produce, or they provide energy. It is very important that the things that we're going to eat, or the food that we're going to eat, it also provide vitamins and minerals, which simple carbs certainly cannot do. Okay, so simple carbs, although it could give us vitamins or minerals, pero it can only give a minimal amount. Okay, so it is very important, or it is advisable that we have to eat only, or mostly those foods that compose of complex carbohydrates, because it provides, aside from energy, it provides minerals, vitamins, and fibers. Let's move to lipids. Lipids are fats. Okay? This group of molecules have multiple variations but have one common characteristics. They are insoluble in water. Insoluble in water, these are the once we talk about insolubility, meaning to say it does not dissolve in water. Okay, it cannot dissolve in water. That's what we call insoluble in water. So if you're going to remember, we are familiar that oil cannot mix with butter, because oil is an example of lipids. Its main characteristics, it's not soluble in water. For that reason, oil cannot mix with water. In general, the main structure of lipids is a glycerol head and a fatty acid tail. Okay, so ganito siya. Majority of lipids consists of one glycerol and three fatty acid tails. This is known as a triacid glycerol or triglyceride. So these fatty acids, or these lipids, its main structure is a glycerol head. Okay, this is the glycerol head and fatty acid tail. Okay, so those fatty acids, or these fatty acids, okay, if you're going to analyze, ito straight, another straight, pero ito medyo naka-bend siya. Okay, so fatty acids, okay, that composed of a certain what we call triglyceride, which is main composition of a what we call lipids. Kasi karamihan ng lipids, ang main structure niya ay meron siyang glycerol head and fatty acid. Okay? And that fatty acid, okay, pwede siyang saturated and unsaturated. Okay? So, if you're going to remember, dun sa glycerol head, pwede siyang ang nakadugtong sa kanyang fatty acid ay straight. On the other hand, doon sa glycerol head, ang pwedeng nakadugtong sa kanya is another fatty acid na may nakabend. So, anong pinagkaiba niyan? Ibig sabihin, this fatty acid is saturated and this fatty acid is unsaturated. Okay? So, pag saturated, single bond with carbon. Pag unsaturated, there's a double bond with carbon. Okay? Unsaturated fatty acids are oils. So those saturated fatty acids, ibig sabihin, oils composed of fatty acid which is saturated. Okay, so these lipids are known as oils, those that stay liquid at room temperature. So those are what we call saturated fats or saturated fatty acids. What are those unsaturated ones? Unsaturated fatty acids are what we call fats. Okay, yung taba mismo. Lipids are known as fats, those that become solid at room temperature. So, yung mga taba, okay, example, yung taba ng baboy, okay, so they are what we call, they're composed of unsaturated fats because they are solid at room temperature. So, naka-double bond carbon. Okay? Yung fatty acids na yan. May double bond carbon. Okay? These are the three major groups of fats or lipids. We have triglyceride. Ito yung unang pinag-usapan natin. It's glycerol head and those fatty acids. We also have phospholipid. Phospholipid is a kind of lipids or fatty acids which is the main structure of the cell membrane. Okay, it is very important for this is one of the most important composition of the cell membrane because this phospholipid makes the cell membrane has an ability to have semi-permeability. Okay, so nagiging selective permeability or selective permeable yung ating cell membrane. So that's why nare-regulate yung mga pumapasok na mga molecules or elements or compounds sa ating cells. So because of the presence of phospholipid, the enter and exiting of the elements or compounds or molecules that could enter and exit outside of our cell will be regulated because of the phospholipid. Another lipids is what we call the steroid. Steroid is a kind of lipids or fat. Lipids or fats stored in cells usually form clear oil droplets called globules because fats do not dissolve in water. So this fats in our cell, because inside of the cell, okay, so mostly they are non-polar like water. Okay, but oils are considered to be polar substances. For that reason, these oil droplets are enclosed in globules. Okay, so these globules are composed of oil droplets. Okay. Plants often store fats in their seeds, and animals store fats in large and clear globules in the cells of adipose tissues. Lipids are used for energy storage. Ano nga ba ang function ng lipids? Like carbohydrates. Carbohydrates is a main source of energy because it stores larger amount of energy. So lipid as well. Lipids used for energy storage. Okay? So kapag wala ka nang makuha ng carbohydrates, okay? Meron namang lipids, meron namang fats, because these fats, okay, contains of these fats or these lipids are contains of fats, which is also a storage of energy. Okay? Aside from that, build structures and as a signal molecules to help cells communicate with each other. So the functions of lipids are, aside from that, we have store energy for long-term waterproof covering. Okay? So these are the lipids, or the thing or the compounds, okay, the things that we can see at home that composed of lipids. We have butter, oils, cream cheese, and lard. So these are the foods, okay, that compose of lipids or fats that we can see at home. Another main class of organic compounds, what we call proteins. Okay? Proteins consist of hydrogen, oxygen, carbon, and nitrogen atoms. Some proteins contain other atoms such as sulfur, phosphorus, iron, copper, or magnesium. Proteins composed of amino acid linked together by peptide bonds. Okay, so paano ba nagiging protein? Galing siya sa mga amino acids. At yung mga amino acids, or para mas picture out natin siya, let us take a look on this diagram. Every circle na yan, that's one amino acid. Okay, dugtong-dugtong siya. Okay, yung mahaba na yan hanggang dito, that makes up one polypeptide. Okay. Now, what's the purpose of polypeptide? Proteins are multiple chains of polypeptide. So, pag madaming isang ganito at another pang ganyan at another pang polypeptide, so ilang polypeptide kaya ang kailangan o kakailanganin para makabuo ng isang protein? So, a protein can have up to 20 or more polypeptide chains. So 20 polypeptides, that's one protein. Okay? If a protein is composed of only one chain, it can also be referred to as a polypeptide. So what are the functions, or what are the examples and functions of proteins? We have enzymes. Okay, enzyme is a kind of protein. Okay, we have the immunoglobulin. So, what's the purpose first of enzyme? So, ang enzyme, nagkakatalize siya, nagpapabilis siya ng mga chemical reaction or metabolism sa ating katawan. Example ng enzyme is polymerase. Okay, so, marami ring enzyme na makikita sa ating laway, sa digestive system, no? So sa laway natin, kaya ang food ay madaling digest because it has composed of different enzymes. Okay? So aside from that, example and use of polymerase is synthesized nucleic acids. We also have the immunoglobulin. Okay? Immunoglobulin. Okay? So this immunoglobulin, its main function is for defense. So it's another form of protein. So example ng immunoglobulin is antibodies. The antibodies that produced by our white blood cells are proteins. Okay? So to mark foreign protein. Its main function is to mark foreign proteins. So ang mga antibodies ay para malabanan yung mga foreign bodies na papasok sa ating katawan. We also have membrane transporter. So example niyan, proton pump, no? So proton pump is a protein used for chemiosmosis. We also have fibers, no? Fibers is a kind of protein. Keratin, no? Keratin na makikita sa ating nails at sa ating buhok. Okay, so they are considered to be protein. So keratin is used for forms here. Muscle has proteins. Example na protein na makikita or muscle itself is, okay, so it has protein. So to build up more muscle, we need to eat rich food, or rich food which is rich of proteins. Okay, so muscles, example ng protein na makikita sa muscles, na nasa muscles ay actin tsaka myosin. So this protein is used for the contraction of muscle fibers. So kung walang itong mga proteins na to, muscles will not contract, no? Hormones are proteins. Example ng hormones ay insulin. One of the example of hormones in our body is insulin. Insulin ay importante sa pagkontrol ng ating blood sugar. Okay, so this is the one of the hormones that being secreted from one of the organ of our body that regulate the amount of glucose or sugar in our blood. So kapag walang enough na insulin, hindi makakontrol yon, hindi makakontrol ang ating blood sugar. We also have ion binding. So casein is an example of protein. So it stores ions in milk. Proteins serve many functions in cells. They are used to build structure, catalyze biochemical reactions for immune response, to package and transport materials, and to help replicate genetic material. So the main functions of proteins are cellular structures, control substances in and out of the cell, fight diseases. So these are the food that high in protein. We have eggs, turkey breast, oatmeal, beef jerky, the milk, peanut butter because it's composed of peanut. Peanuts are rich in protein. We have tuna. We all know that meats are our main source, okay, of protein. We have cottage cheese, salmon, another meat, tofu. Okay, tofu or tokwa is high in protein also. Kay mga vegetarian, one of the source of their protein is tofu. Protein bars and Greek yogurt, yung mga yogurt. So these are the food that we can see at home that are rich or high in protein. Okay, let's move to the last what we call class or main class of organic compound, nucleic acid. There are two variants of nucleic acids. We have deoxyribonucleic acid or DNA and the ribonucleic acid or RNA. So this is the RNA single strand and the DNA double strand. So saan ito makikita? Sa loob ng ating cell, especially in the nucleus. Okay? Their main function is the storage and synthesis of genetic information of the cell. So this DNA are composed of our genes, which is the what we call this. Its main function is for the heredity. Okay, this is the if the cell is the what we call this one, if the cell is the basic unit of life, okay, genes is the basic unit of heredity, and these genes are located in our DNA, and DNA and RNA are considered to be nucleic acid, and nucleic acid is one of the main class of organic compound. Okay, nucleic acid, the DNA carries genetic information for the cells. Sections of the DNA molecules called genes contain the information to make protein. Okay, so napaka-importante ng genes na yun, ng DNA kasi sila ang nag-uutos para gumawa ng protein ng ating cell. DNA serves two main functions. Molecules of the DNA can produce other DNA molecules and RNA molecules. Okay, Okay, so ang DNA serves two main functions. Can produce other DNA molecules and RNA molecules, and it contains information to our genes. On the other hand, RNA molecules are directly responsible for the synthesis of proteins. Ayan, so DNA molecules produce DNA molecules and RNA molecules. Pero ang RNA molecules, okay, responsible lang siya sa synthesis of proteins. Okay, so to make it clear, ang DNA, aside from the fact that composed of our genes, siya ay gumagawa ng another DNA at RNA molecules. Pero yung mga RNA molecules, its main function is for the synthesis of our proteins. Nucleic acids are composed of repeating subunits called nucleotides. So these nucleic acids sa RNA and DNA are composed of what we call nucleotides. This is the part of nucleotides. If the proteins comes from the what we call the chains of amino acids, nucleic acid comes from the chain of nucleotides, and nucleotides has different parts. We have the nitrogenous base, the pentose sugar, okay, and the phosphate group, which make up one nucleotide. Okay, so the chain of it, chain ng mga nucleotide will come up to a RNA. Kapag double-stranded na siya, it becomes DNA. That's what we call the DNA. So we have the RNA here and the DNA here. So yan, their chain, yung mga yan, nandiyan yung mga, this is the etong green na yan, that's what we call the pentose sugar tsaka phosphate group. Tapos yung mga nakahilera na yan, okay, that's the nitrogenous bases. Okay, so this is the RNA. Okay, so it has the sugar phosphate or yan, sabi nga natin kanina, phosphate group at saka pentose sugar or the sugar group, deoxyribose sugar. Okay, so tapos meron siya mga nitrogenous bases. Okay, the nitrogenous bases of an RNA are the cytosine, guanine, adenine, and uracil. Okay, on the other hand, sa DNA naman, since double-stranded siya, okay, sinabing double strand, dalawang strand, no? Kaya siya naging dalawa kasi nagpares yung kanyang mga nitrogenous bases. Okay, the nitrogenous bases of the DNA, on the other hand, we have cytosine, guanine, adenine, and thymine. So, DNA and RNA are considered to be nucleic acids. Okay, so that's all for our week 6. Those are the major or main classes of organic compounds. Kindly look at the given task of your teacher for your week 6. Thank you for listening.